Here at VisualPolitik, we have talked about how we now live in a world where every day there is less poverty and people are able to live better lives. A change that is even reaching the most unprotected region in the world, sub-Saharan Africa. We already talked about the African lions and paid special attention to cases like Rwanda. However, we still need to talk about when and why this region of the world, which so many considered hopelessly destitute, began to change. Well, that is precisely what we are going to talk about in this video, that and what we can expect in the upcoming years. For years, talking about Africa has meant talking about extreme poverty, natural disasters, and all kinds of conflicts. And in a way, things are still that way. See, no more or less than half, yes, half of all the people who suffer from extreme poverty in the world live in the sub-Saharan African region. We're talking about 400 million people here. Also, news like this isn't surprising either.
We are facing the largest humanitarian crisis since the creation of the United Nations in 1945. Now, more than 20 million people across 4 countries face starvation and famine. Stephen O'Brien, the UN Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs.
Due to all of this, I'm sure nobody is a stranger to those NGO campaigns seeking to raise funds for all kinds of humanitarian catastrophes in Africa. You're probably also familiar with governments allocating billions of dollars each year to official development assistance. In fact, government aid is as high as it's ever been. Every year, the African continent receives about $50 billion. And it's been going on for decades. However, the truth is that for years, all of this money didn't help very much. Let's take a look at, for example, the 1990s. While international aid in this area of the world amounted to tens of billions, what do you think happened with poverty? Do you think it decreased? Well, no, none of that actually. Between 1990 and 1998, poverty levels went from 55% to 58%. Well, how could this be, you might ask? Well, because intentions are one thing, but reality is really different. Some experts claim that for years, official aid weakens local producers.
Evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates that aid to Africa has made the poor poorer and growth slower. Dambisa Moyo, an economist and the author of Dead Aid: Why Aid is Not Working and How There is a Better Way for Africa.
For example, in Tanzania, it was cheaper to buy subsidized milk from the European Union than from local producers. However, with the beginning of a new century, suddenly everything began to change.
The Great Change.
Suddenly, when Africa seemed helpless, everything began to change. With the beginning of the 21st century, statistics absolutely turned around. Since the year 2000, extreme poverty has dropped by almost 40%. Average life expectancy has grown by more than 10 years. Infant mortality has decreased to less than half. The same has happened with HIV infections in children and, well, virtually any other statistic. If we look at the economy, we'll be able to see how between 2000 and 2015, sub-Saharan African countries, excluding South Africa, which is a bit of a peculiar case as we've seen on VisualPolitik previously, grew by an average of 6%, which is more than twice, for example, Latin America. Another great indicator of how things are changing is tourism. Yep, tourism, you heard that right. The tourism sector has some particular characteristics that reveal a lot of information. On the one hand, this sector has great transformational power for the poorest because it's very labor intensive, and on the other hand, we need to take into account that people don't vacation in countries that are at war or have famine or have epidemics. It's just not a nice holiday. When this industry improves in the poorest countries, it is usually a good indicator that things are improving as a whole. Well, if we see the data, we might be quite surprised because this sector has been growing at an average annual rate of no less than 9% for 20 years. That is 2 full decades of nearly double-digit growth. Yes, it does seem as if things are really moving forward. But at this point in the video, you might be wondering something, because I certainly am. What on earth happened to cause such a change? Well, have a look at this graph, because it really gives a clue. Well, what exactly led to this miracle? Well, let's have a look at that.
Preparing for takeoff.
Many things drive change, but we will now see how 3 particular events in Africa began to change, probably permanently, this continent's reality. The first one, it was remittances. See, in Africa, the population grows very quickly, which, along with the terrible living conditions, has led many Africans to immigrate to richer countries in the past few decades. Today, these people send tens of billions of dollars home every year. This money is used in local markets or to set up businesses. These are what we call remittances, and they are actually much more important than developmental aid. Second, and very importantly, in March of 2000, the US Congress finally approved a law that had been promoted by Bill Clinton in his last years in office. It's called the African Growth and Opportunity Act. This is basically a law that establishes a preferential trade agreement that eliminates tariffs and reduces barriers to trade for thousands and thousands of products from sub-Saharan Africa. See, since this agreement was approved, we can see that between 2000 and 2016, which weren't exactly the most prosperous years ever, trade between the United States and sub-Saharan Africa multiplied 2.5 times, which means a 6% growth every year. And third, and perhaps the key to everything, there's China. Yep, you heard it right. In 2001, China, it joined the World Trade Organization and became something of a factory to the world. Well, what has happened since then has been quite impressive. China's huge growth has lifted tens of millions of people out of poverty, both in China and in Africa.
Government of China and that of government of Ethiopia have agreed on enhancing Ethiopia's industrialization and on supporting Ethiopia's great vision to become Africa's manufacturing powerhouse.
Allow me to explain myself here. The Asian giant's gigantic growth has increased this country's demand for all kinds of products: raw materials, food, manufacturing, everything. While many African countries took advantage of this opportunity. Since the year 2000, trade between China and Africa has multiplied by no less than 17 times, representing an annual growth rate of almost 20%. Since 2009, China is, already, by far the continent's largest trading partner. But not only that, the Chinese, as we mentioned here, have also been investing a lot of money all over the world, and Africa is certainly no exception. In 2016, 4 out of every 10 euros that foreigners invested in Africa came from China. Today, more than 10,000 Chinese companies are doing business on the African continent, mostly private companies that work in all kinds of industries. And that number, well, it just keeps rising. Yes, my friends, this is how Africa has managed to start turning the statistics around. The great catalyst for this entire change, it wasn't some kind of miracle, and it didn't have much to do with developmental aid. This change was driven by trade and investment. And Africans themselves seem to see it very clearly. And if you don't believe me, well, take a look at this.
African countries are forging ahead to complete negotiations for a continental free trade area between 55 countries by early next year. The idea, adopted by the African Union in 2012, is to create a single market which includes the free movement of goods, services, and people.
Yes, that's right. Africa is working to expand trade to every corner of the continent. Not all countries are developing equally, but this is quite normal in all parts of the world.
Following the Asian star.
At this point, we need to ask ourselves another question. Can we really dream of Africa's final takeoff? See, I suspect that many of you are probably thinking right now, well, everything you say in VisualPolitik is very nice, but it isn't usually what really happens. Well, yes, in Africa it's absolutely true there are countries that are doing well, and there are countries that are not doing well. But you know what? That's true, but it's also really normal. See, it may sound shocking today, but in the 1950s, Asia was as poor as Africa. I mean, today we can look at cities like Shanghai, Hong Kong, Taipei, and it makes it really hard to imagine that these places were once poor. But when South Korea or Taiwan began to grow, they weren't richer than Ghana or Senegal, for example. And China, India, and Vietnam, they were of course way poorer. Well, we can absolutely draw some really interesting ideas from this, because Asian countries didn't grow all at once, and they didn't grow all together. While Korea, Singapore, Japan, and Taiwan grew, other countries such as China, Indonesia, and India remained immersed in poverty. Also, they weren't exactly democratic models. South Korea and Taiwan were under hard dictatorships until very recently. Singapore is in a similar state, and China, well, what can I say? In short, lots of poverty, some more advanced countries with others further behind, plenty of dictatorships. Essentially, what we're seeing in Africa today wasn't so different from what was happening in Asia just 50 years ago.
Ready for takeoff?
Yes, things in Africa are changing. Out of the 10 countries that are apparently growing the most in 2017, 5 are in Africa. If we take a look at the latest Doing Business report, the World Bank indicator for measuring how easy it is to do business in certain economies, we can see that out of the 10 countries that have improved the most, 4 are also African. True, poverty here is still very high, and these countries are facing a difficult challenge. Indeed, the large population growth on the continent is actually going to multiply in the upcoming decades. However, dear viewer, the good news is that everything indicates that thanks to trade and international investment, Africa is finding its way, and maybe, once and for all, is ready for takeoff. But now it's your turn. Do you think that Africa will emulate the development that Asia has had in recent decades? Well, leave us your answer in the comment section below, as well as in this survey, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. Do hit that like button if you did, and do not forget to subscribe for brand new videos from this channel every Monday and Thursday. Also, don't forget to check out our friends at the Reconsider Media podcast. They provided the vocals in this episode that were not mine. And as always, thank you for watching.